Hi everyone. Today's mini lesson is going to continue our conversation about how the founding primary documents influence the interpretation of the Constitution and the democratic values. So we've already looked at the Declaration of Independence, how that impacted things like equality. We looked at the Constitution, more specifically the preamble, and looked at how that kind of continued that same conversation. We've looked at the Gettysburg Address. And now we're going to look at three amendments that together are tagged the Reconstruction Amendment. So that's the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the Constitution. So just to give you a little bit of background before we get into the notes portion, we are now jumping a little bit ahead in history because these initial lessons are a little bit of a review of things you've already learned or had some background knowledge of in terms of founding history. So Declaration of Independence is officially signed in 1776. The Revolutionary Wars fought from 1775 to 1783. Articles of Confederation was initially adopted in 1781, lasts till 1789. Constitution's officially ratified in 1789. And now we're jumping all the way in history to right around the Civil War. So Civil War is fought from 1861 to 1865. Gettysburg Address dates to 1863. So these Reconstruction amendments are in that time frame and not around when the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution is formed. So we're jumping ahead. Lincoln is president at the beginning of the Reconstruction amendments. So, the learning target for this lesson is I can identify core ideals of American society as reflected in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Keep in mind that these would have been developed not that long after the Gettysburg Address, but the Gettysburg Address was just a speech. These are actual legal amendments or changes to the Constitution. So, the First Amendment we're going to look at is the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, just after the end of the Civil War, and formally, legally ended slavery. However, it took quite a bit of time for word to get out, and slaves continued to live under slavery for quite some time before word had gotten out to all of the southern states that slavery was ended. And then there was a big question as to what these thousands and thousands of slaves were going to do because they had no money, they had no property, they had nothing. So, even though slavery formally ends, there is still a big question in terms of how the former slaves will be treated, what they are able to do. Most of them couldn't read, they had no education system. So, there were still a lot of questions based around slavery, but this amendment formally ends slavery. In terms of the core ideals of American society, the one it specifically focuses on is this idea of equality for all individuals. It addressed the dehumanization of slavery and made a just and inclusive society. So, all this was done in theory. However, as you will learn, it took a long time before all of this was thoroughly enforced from the federal government. The next amendment we're looking at is the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868, so this was about 3 years later. It granted citizenship to all citizens born or naturalized in the United States. What this meant was if you were born on American soil, then you were automatically an American citizen, or if you went through the formal immigration process, then you were also considered a citizen. And no matter whether you were born here or naturalized citizen, there was equal protection under the law. And again, this addresses this core ideal of equality in that all citizens have the same level of protection. The 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870. The 15th Amendment was one of the more controversial amendments for a couple reasons by a few different groups. So, it prohibited the denial of voting based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. In other words, African American males were now allowed to vote. However, it was largely criticized because a lot of women's rights activists argued that women should have also been included and combined in the 15th Amendment. However, the abolitionist movement leaders argued that this needed to be done first and then that could be done after the fact. It took a tremendous amount of time before the 15th Amendment was thoroughly enforced. So we will learn about all different kinds of discrimination practices, especially in southern states, that greatly limited significant chunks of the population from voting, even though it was prohibited under the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment expanded Democratic participation and equal protection under the law, again in theory. However, it took quite some time before these were actually enforced.